these icebergs, they're made of compacted snow, and although they often sit in frozen ocean, their origin is on the land, and they slide off and they detach from the land, detach from an ice sheet or an ice shelf, and then often they float around. But because they've come from the land, they're often in shallow waters. So this one got almost immediately pinned on the land, where it stayed for quite a long time, and it's only recently, within the last year, started to move, and now it's of course moving out of Antarctic waters.
So how was it able to free itself, or was it just a question of melting a little bit so that it sort of dislodged?
That is a great question, and I know one that a lot of people are thinking about. So, of course, this iceberg is sitting in the ocean, so it's naturally melting very slowly. But we've also seen changes in the ocean around Antarctica recently. It's become a bit warmer in the ocean. So there are a lot of really interesting questions around whether this iceberg has been freed by the enormously warm conditions that we've seen in the ocean that have caused massive declines in sea ice. So the fact that this iceberg is freed now, it could be a coincidence, or it could be a really, really interesting and scary indicator of environmental change.
Yeah. So what is your sense, though? Was it the warming sea temperatures? And I know you've just been at COP28, where this has been a big issue up for discussion.
I wouldn't like to put a number on it, on the likelihood that this has been freed by environmental change rather than a sudden climate change, but certainly we could get to the bottom of this. This isn't the end of the story. We can use methods like satellite altimetry, where we look at the height of the iceberg and how far it sticks out, to figure out whether it's been melting anomalously fast in the recent last 3-year period.
So now where is it headed?
So it's headed out into the Southern Ocean, and as it moves away from Antarctica, the natural environment gets a lot warmer, so it starts to melt at a much faster rate. And when it does that, it'll stir up nutrients from the deep ocean because it sticks down really far into the sea. But it'll also shed other nutrients like dust that'll cause a massive phytoplankton bloom, probably in the area behind it. So as it heads north, it's going to trigger loads of really powerful environmental changes. Of course, as it melts, it releases fresh water into the sea, which is salty. So there are loads of different changes that it's going to cause as it drifts north into the ocean and disrupts the environment.
And so how problematic could some of those issues be as it goes along its way?
Yeah, it's difficult to frame it as inherently problematic because these things are natural. So icebergs have been carving off Antarctica for a very long time and drifting north. So it is going to disrupt the ecosystem, but ecosystem disruption is sort of an inherently natural thing. One thing that we should consider is that ice sheets are sliding off Antarctica into the sea and forming ice shelves and icebergs at a record rate at the moment, and that's going to increase with climate change. So although that ecological disruption is quite natural now, we are looking at changes in the environment that could be really damaging.
And even when you talk about, which I hadn't thought about, this sort of fresh water going into seawater, does that impact marine life?
Yeah, it certainly does. So there's definitely a propensity to form sea ice behind the iceberg if it's in the winter and at the right time of year. But also the changes in the water properties really support a blooming of these tiny marine plants called phytoplankton, and they can be eaten by larger animals that are really important parts of the food web. So it certainly is a big deal for the marine ecology there.
Is there any thought, as you talk about with these warming sea temperatures, to try and control its passage, control what is happening with its movement?
I think that would be a stretch
Too big
for even a powerful navy. Yeah, it's trillions of tons, and the force of the wind blowing on an iceberg like that, which is the main driver of it, is just humongous. So I don't think we could really control it. And I think geopolitically, if people started to do that, it could be problematic.
Indeed. So, you've worked in the Antarctic, you're now moving to the Arctic. How concerned are you, and what was your sense at COP28 about sort of whether the reality is sinking in as to how these warming sea temperatures are going to so dramatically change things?
Yeah, the cryosphere was quite high up the agenda, the frozen parts of the world at COP28. And it certainly sunk in with some countries. So there were high-level coalitions that were really focused on things like sea level rise, melting glaciers, water scarcity, and things like that. And I think a lot of nations, particularly mountain nations and low-lying nations, were really acutely attuned to the threats that they faced. But equally, we saw a lot of resistance from some other countries that were less concerned about environmental changes. But the really big point we're trying to make as scientists is that everyone on Earth is affected by the changes in Antarctica because of sea level rise. So sea level rise, it puts direct pressure on coastal countries, but it puts indirect pressure on loads of other countries because it disrupts food systems, it causes geopolitical instability. So we're trying to get that message through, but it is difficult sometimes.
Yeah. An interesting one. We'll watch old A23A as it moves around. Good to have you on, Robbie, again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.